clinical practice guidelines for the management of obesity in adults were developed by Obesity Canada and in collaboration with the Association of Bariatric Physicians and Surgeons in Canada. This was done through a 3-year-long process that involved people living with obesity, researchers, and healthcare professionals working in the field of obesity. What's unique about the Canadian Clinical Practice Guidelines is that they were developed in collaboration with patients living with obesity who helped us identify the key research questions that were important to them. The other thing that is unique about the Canadian Clinical Practice Guidelines is that they redefined obesity as a chronic disease that is characterized by health impairments related to adiposity. So rather than defining obesity according to body size, the Canadian guidelines define obesity as excess or abnormal adiposity or body fat that impairs health. And this was very necessary to do for us because we needed to address the pervasive weight bias and stigma that exists in our society and the assumption that people who live in larger bodies have obesity, when in fact the science shows that not everyone who lives in a larger body will develop obesity-related complications. The Canadian Clinical Practice Guidelines for the Management of Obesity in Adults were released in August of 2020 in collaboration with Obesity Canada and the Canadian Association of Bariatric Physicians and Surgeons. Soon after the launch, we received multiple requests from several countries around the world asking whether they could adapt the guideline for their use. In 2021, we launched a pilot project to adapt the clinical practice guidelines in Chile and Ireland. The results of this pilot project indicate that it is feasible and cost-effective to adapt the Canadian Clinical Practice Guidelines for the management of obesity in adults. And so we expect many other countries using the process that we have developed through this pilot project to adapt the guidelines for their countries.
I'm the project coordinator currently for the adaptation of the Canadian Adult Obesity Clinical Practice Guidelines for Ireland. So that has involved taking the Canadian guidelines and adapting them for our own setting. So considering how they fit with our healthcare system in Ireland, the resourcing that we have available, our commitment to evidence-based practice, patient-centred care and shared decision-making with patients. We were particularly excited to get involved with this adaptation project because it's aligned really well with the launch of our model of care for obesity in Ireland. So we're just in the process of setting up some new services for people living with obesity, and the adaptation of the guidelines has provided us with a really excellent opportunity to embed high quality, standardised, non-stigmatising care, because that's really, I suppose, what appealed to us about the Canadian guidelines, that they really set that standard for best practice in obesity care clinically. So we didn't actually have clinical practice guidelines in Ireland for obesity. There's historically been quite a significant focus on obesity prevention in a lot of our policy documents. And as new services have began to be set up as part of the model of care, we've had clinicians really looking for guidance. We also have a patient organisation, ICPO, who have spearheaded a lot of our engagement with this process because they're very keen that the services that are being set up, again, support evidence-based practice. So it was an opportunity for us to not start from scratch, but to learn a lot from our Canadian colleagues in terms of how you develop these kinds of recommendations and guidelines to support services.
These guidelines are important that they focus on the impairment to health and not the scales, and that it is a patient-centred approach and that there is greater focus on proven treatments. We need to move away from the silo approach and collectively apply and implement these guidelines. We see mixed messages within our patient groups, and we really need people with living with obesity to understand that treatment for obesity is lifelong. Furthermore, we also need education for healthcare professionals and GPs on the damaging effects of weight bias and stigma. We are here to support the ASOI and the national programme in the work that they do, and hope that this is not another well-written document that will not see action. That is why we are here to help. Change might not happen today, but we are inspired and encouraged that these guidelines will see change coming to improve the lives of people living with obesity and their treatment and care.